Loneliness doesn't always look like isolation. It can exist in rooms full of people, inside conversations that never go deep enough, behind a calm presence that reveals nothing. The Sigma male doesn't struggle to be around others. He struggles to feel understood by them. And that difference changes everything. What looks like independence from the outside often carries a quiet distance on the inside. What makes this loneliness different is that it's chosen, not forced. He filters people, limits access, avoids surface-level connection, not because he can't connect, but because most interactions don't align. Over time, that selectivity creates space, and in that space, silence grows. No drama, no conflict, just a quiet absence of depth that most people never notice. In this video, we're breaking down the hidden loneliness Sigma males experience and why their strength, independence, and control often come with a cost few people understand. If you want to understand Sigma psychology, emotional depth, and the reality behind silent independence, subscribe to Silent Wise and stay until the end, because the final insight explains why this loneliness is both a weakness and a form of power. He feels misunderstood even when people are around him. Misunderstanding stays constant. Presence doesn't equal connection. He can sit in a room full of people, hear the conversations, respond when needed, and still feel a distance that no one else seems to notice. It's not about being ignored. It's about being seen without being understood. Words get exchanged, but meaning doesn't land the same way. What he thinks, how he processes, how he interprets situations, it doesn't always translate. As interactions continue, the gap becomes clearer. He explains something, but it gets simplified. He shares a thought, but it gets redirected. Not intentionally, not with bad intent, just a difference in depth. Most conversations move quickly, staying at the surface, but his mind doesn't operate there. It looks for patterns, for meaning, for layers beneath what's being said, and when those layers aren't met, something feels incomplete. He adapts, keeps things simple, matches the pace, but internally, the difference remains. From that point, silence becomes more frequent. Not because he has nothing to say, but because saying more doesn't always change the outcome. The effort to explain becomes unnecessary when the result stays the same. So he reduces it. He listens more, speaks less, and allows conversations to pass without trying to reshape them. That choice protects energy, but it also increases distance. The connection becomes functional, not deep. Over time, this pattern builds quietly. He becomes present without being fully engaged. People see him, talk to him, interact with him, but they don't fully reach him. And because he doesn't express that gap openly, it remains unnoticed. The misunderstanding isn't visible, it's internal. People often assume loneliness comes from being alone, but for him, it often comes from being around others and still feeling separate. Not disconnected physically, but unmatched mentally. That difference creates a silence that no one hears. Eventually, the realization settles in. Being understood is not guaranteed by presence, and when that understanding is missing, even the closest environments can feel distant. He struggles to find deep connections that match his mindset. Depth becomes rare. Alignment becomes selective. He doesn't struggle to meet people. He struggles to meet people who think, feel, and process at the same level. Conversations start easily, interactions flow, but something feels incomplete. The surface is there, but the depth isn't. And once he notices that gap, it's impossible to ignore. As connections form, the pattern repeats. The beginning feels promising, shared interests, good energy, easy communication. But over time, the difference in mindset appears. Conversations stay at the surface when he naturally goes deeper. Ideas get simplified when he expands them. Emotions are expressed quickly when he processes them slowly and internally. It's not a failure of connection. It's a mismatch of depth, and that mismatch creates distance even when everything seems fine on the outside. From that point, selectivity increases. He stops investing fully in connections that don't align, not out of judgment, but out of awareness. He recognizes when the connection will remain limited, and instead of forcing it, he steps back internally. He participates, but doesn't attach. He engages, but doesn't invest deeply. That protects him from frustration, but it also reduces the number of people who truly reach him. Over time, this pattern narrows his circle. Fewer people remain. Fewer conversations feel meaningful. The search for depth becomes quieter, less visible, but more intentional. He is not looking for quantity. He is looking for alignment. and alignment is rare. That rarity creates space. People often assume connection is about frequency, how often you talk, how often you meet. But for him, it's about depth, how much is understood without needing to be explained. And when that depth is missing, the connection feels incomplete, no matter how often it happens. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. It's not difficult to connect. It's difficult to connect at the level that feels real. And until that level is found, most connections will feel temporary, even when they last. He chooses solitude, but sometimes feels the weight of it. Solitude is chosen. Weight still exists. He steps away, intentionally filters conversations, reduces noise, creates space where his mind can stay clear. It's not forced isolation. It's a decision. The environment becomes quieter, more controlled, more aligned, and in that quiet, he finds focus. No interruptions, no pressure, just clarity. But clarity comes with a cost that isn't always visible. As time passes, the silence deepens. Days move without unnecessary interaction. Conversations become limited. The same space that once felt peaceful begins to feel heavier at certain moments. Not constantly, not overwhelming, but present. There are times when the absence of connection becomes noticeable. Not because he needs constant interaction, but because depth is rare. The few moments where real understanding could exist are missing. And in that gap, the weight appears. From that point, awareness becomes sharper. He recognizes the trade-off clearly. Solitude protects focus, protects direction, protects energy, but it also reduces the chances of meaningful connection. He doesn't regret the choice, but he understands it fully. The same independence that gives him strength also creates distance. And that distance, while controlled, still exists. Over time, he adapts to it. The weight doesn't disappear, it becomes familiar. He learns how to carry it, without letting it slow him down. Moments of silence become part of his rhythm. He doesn't rush to fill them. He doesn't break his structure to avoid them. Instead, he moves through them with awareness. That awareness keeps him stable. People often misunderstand this phase. They see solitude and assume peace without struggle. But what they don't see is the balance behind it. The constant choice between clarity and connection. The decision to protect one while accepting the absence of the other. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Solitude is not the absence of people. It's the presence of space. And while that space creates strength, it can also carry weight that only he feels. He avoids surface-level interactions, limiting social circles. Surface gets filtered. Depth becomes the standard. He stops engaging in conversations that go nowhere. Small talk, repeated topics, predictable exchanges. They fill time but don't build anything. At first, he participates like everyone else, adapting to the rhythm, matching the tone. But over time, something becomes clear. These interactions drain energy without adding meaning. And once that realization settles, he begins removing them. As interactions continue, the difference becomes noticeable. Invitations are declined more often. Conversations become shorter, more focused. He listens, but doesn't extend what doesn't align. Others continue engaging at the same level, but he no longer follows. The same topics that once felt normal now feel repetitive. The same patterns that once felt acceptable now feel limiting. That shift reduces the number of interactions naturally. From that point, his circle begins shrinking. Not through conflict, not through rejection, through selection. He doesn't announce it. He applies it. Fewer people remain, but those who do align more closely with how he thinks and communicates. The environment becomes quieter, more intentional. Each interaction carries weight because it is not frequent. That difference changes how connection feels. Over time, this selectivity strengthens his mental space. Without constant low-value interaction, focus improves. Energy stays stable. The need to engage just to fill silence disappears. He becomes comfortable with fewer connections because they are more aligned. Quality replaces quantity. Depth replaces frequency. People often misunderstand this phase. They see a smaller circle and assume distance or disinterest. But what they are actually seeing is refinement. The removal of what doesn't add value. He is not avoiding people. He is choosing how to engage with them. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Not every interaction deserves attention. And once that is understood, the circle becomes smaller but stronger, more aligned, and more real. He keeps emotions private, making it hard for others to reach him. Emotions stay internal. Access stays limited. He doesn't express everything he feels, even when the moment allows it. Most people externalize sharing reactions, explaining feelings, making their emotional state visible. But he filters that instinct, not because nothing is there, but because not everything needs to be shown. What he feels is processed internally before it is ever expressed externally. As interactions continue, the difference becomes noticeable. Others share freely, expecting the same in return. They open up, explain, reveal layers of themselves, but when they look at him, they don't find the same level of exposure. His responses remain controlled. His tone stays steady. There are no sudden emotional shifts, no visible reactions that reveal depth immediately. That creates a gap. People sense there is more beneath the surface, but they can't access it easily. From that point, connection becomes more difficult, not because he avoids it, but because it requires patience to reach him. He doesn't open up quickly. Trust builds slowly, layer by layer, and in a world where most interactions move fast, that pace feels distant. Others may misinterpret it as disinterest or detachment, but in reality, it is protection. He reveals only when it aligns, not when it is expected. Over time, this pattern strengthens his control. Emotions don't dictate his actions. They don't shift his behavior in unpredictable ways. That stability makes him consistent, but it also creates distance. Without visible emotion, others struggle to understand where they stand. They look for signals, for reactions, for something to read but find very little. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume that what is not expressed is not felt. But what they don't see is the depth that remains internal, the processing, the reflection, the awareness all happening without being shown. He doesn't lack emotion. He manages it differently. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Privacy protects him, but it also limits how others connect with him. And that balance between control and connection is where the distance quietly forms. He becomes emotionally self-reliant, rarely depending on others. Self-reliance replaces dependence. Support becomes internal. He stops looking outward to stabilize what he feels. Most people lean on others to process emotion sharing, seeking reassurance, expecting someone to help carry the weight. But over time, he removes that pattern, not because support is unavailable, but because relying on it creates inconsistency. Others may not always understand, may not always be present, may not always respond the way he needs. So he builds something more stable himself. As situations unfold, the difference becomes clear. When something affects him, he doesn't immediately reach out. He steps back, processes it internally, allows his thoughts to settle without external input. That space gives him clarity. Emotions don't escalate through discussion. They stabilize through reflection. While others seek validation to confirm how they feel, he defines it himself. That control reduces confusion. What he feels becomes clear because it is not influenced. From that point, strength begins forming quietly. Each time he processes something on his own, confidence increases. Not visible confidence, but internal stability. He learns how to handle pressure without needing reassurance. He understands his reactions without needing explanation. That independence creates consistency. No matter what happens, he knows he can manage it internally. And that certainty removes fear of emotional instability. Over time, this self-reliance becomes his default. He doesn't depend on others to feel balanced. He doesn't need constant support to move forward. That makes him resilient. Situations that might overwhelm others become manageable because he doesn't rely on external support to handle them. His stability remains consistent because it is self-built. People often misunderstand this phase. They see independence and assume distance or detachment. But what they are actually seeing is control, the ability to carry emotions without needing to offload them, the ability to remain stable without external reinforcement. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Emotional self-reliance creates strength, but it also creates separation. Because when you stop depending on others to carry what you feel, you also reduce how much they can share it with you. He distances himself after disappointment, reducing trust over time. Distance follows disappointment. Trust adjusts downward. He doesn't react loudly when something breaks. No confrontation, no immediate explanation, just a quiet shift. What once felt open becomes measured. What once felt certain becomes observed. Disappointment doesn't create chaos, it creates recalibration. And that recalibration begins internally, long before anyone else notices it. As interactions continue, the difference becomes subtle but consistent. He still engages, still responds, still shows presence, but something is reduced. Access is limited, information becomes controlled, the same level of openness no longer exists. Others may not recognize it immediately because nothing dramatic happened, but the depth has changed. What was once given freely is now filtered. From that point, trust becomes conditional, not based on words, not based on intention, based on pattern. He watches more closely. Behavior gets evaluated against consistency. The same situation that once required belief now requires evidence. That shift removes assumption. Trust is no longer automatic. It is earned through repetition, and once it drops, rebuilding it becomes difficult. Over time, this pattern strengthens. Each disappointment reinforces the adjustment. The threshold for trust rises. Fewer people meet it. The circle becomes smaller, not through rejection, but through alignment. He doesn't actively push people away. He simply stops pulling them closer. That difference creates distance without conflict. People often misunderstand this phase. They notice the change but can't define it. Conversations feel lighter, connection feels reduced, but there is no clear reason given. That's because the reason was processed internally. The decision was made quietly, without needing to be expressed. Eventually, the result becomes stable. Trust is no longer easily given. It is placed carefully, protected intentionally, and adjusted when necessary. And once it has been reduced, it rarely returns to what it was, because the awareness that caused the change doesn't disappear. He processes everything internally, without sharing his struggles. Processing stays internal. Struggles remain unspoken. He doesn't externalize what he's dealing with, even when it would be easier to. Most people release pressure by sharing, talking through problems, seeking reassurance, letting others carry part of the weight. But he holds it, not out of pride, not out of fear, out of habit. What happens inside is handled inside. As situations unfold, the difference becomes clear. When something affects him, there is no visible shift. Conversations continue normally. Behavior stays consistent. There are no signs that something is being processed beneath the surface. Others may assume everything is fine because nothing appears different, but internally, everything is active. Thoughts are being organized, patterns are being analyzed, decisions are forming quietly, without interruption. From that point, depth increases, but visibility decreases. He spends more time thinking than speaking, more time reflecting than explaining. The process becomes detailed, precise, controlled. He breaks situations down, understands them, resolves them without needing external input. That independence makes him stable. He doesn't rely on others to clarify what he feels or what he should do. He defines it himself. Over time, this pattern becomes consistent. No matter what happens, the response is internal first. The outside remains steady while the inside adapts. That creates resilience. He can handle pressure without showing it, move through challenges without announcing them. But it also creates distance. Without sharing, others don't see what he's going through. Without expression, connection remains limited. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume that what isn't expressed isn't experienced. But what they don't see is the depth of processing happening internally. He doesn't avoid struggle, he contains it. He doesn't ignore it, he works through it silently. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Internal processing creates strength, but it also isolates. Because when everything is handled alone, there is nothing for others to hold with you. He outgrows people faster than he replaces them. Growth creates distance. Alignment changes. The circle doesn't keep up. As he evolves, the pace of his thinking, his priorities, and his standards shifts. What once felt aligned begins to feel limited. Conversations repeat. Mindsets stay fixed. The same patterns that were once comfortable now feel restrictive. It's not sudden. It happens gradually, almost quietly, until the difference becomes impossible to ignore. As time passes, the gap becomes more visible. He listens to the same conversations but hears them differently. What once felt engaging now feels predictable. What once felt meaningful now feels surface level. The difference isn't about superiority. It's about direction. He is moving forward, while others remain where they are. And because growth is internal first, the change isn't always visible to them. But for him, it's clear. From that point, connection starts shifting. He doesn't cut people off immediately. He adjusts. He participates less, shares less, engages less deeply. The distance forms without conflict. The bond weakens not because something went wrong, but because alignment is no longer there. And while that space grows, replacements don't appear immediately. Finding new connections that match his level of growth takes time. Over time, this creates a unique kind of isolation. The old circle no longer fits, and the new one hasn't formed yet. He stands in between, no longer where he was, not yet where he's going. That space can feel empty, not because he lacks people, but because he lacks alignment. And alignment is what creates real connection. People often misunderstand this phase. They see distance and assume disconnection or change in personality. But what they are actually seeing is evolution. Growth doesn't always happen collectively. Sometimes it separates before it reconnects. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Outgrowing people is part of moving forward. But growth doesn't guarantee immediate replacement. And in that gap, silence expands not because there's no one around, but because there is no one aligned yet. He accepts loneliness as part of his path, even when it's difficult. Acceptance replaces resistance. Loneliness becomes acknowledged. He stops trying to eliminate the feeling and starts understanding it. Most people fight loneliness, fill it with noise, distractions, constant connection. But he sees something different. The feeling isn't always a problem to fix. Sometimes it's a consequence of how he chooses to live: selective, independent, controlled. And once that becomes clear, the struggle shifts. As time passes, the weight doesn't disappear, but it becomes defined. He recognizes when it appears and why. Not because he lacks people, but because he lacks alignment. Not because he is isolated, but because he filters deeply. That awareness changes how he experiences it. Instead of reacting to the feeling, he observes it. He allows it to exist without letting it control his direction. That space between feeling and reaction becomes important. From that point, stability forms around acceptance. He doesn't abandon his path to escape the discomfort. He doesn't lower his standards to avoid the silence. He continues forward, even when the space feels heavy at times. That consistency builds strength, not the absence of loneliness, but the ability to carry it without losing direction. The same feeling that could disrupt him becomes something he moves with. Over time, this acceptance becomes part of his structure. Loneliness is no longer unexpected. It is understood. It appears in certain moments, fades in others, but it no longer defines his actions. He doesn't depend on external connection to remove it. Instead, he builds a life that remains stable whether it is present or not. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume acceptance means comfort, but acceptance doesn't remove difficulty. It removes resistance. He still feels it, but he is no longer controlled by it. That difference allows him to keep moving without interruption. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Loneliness is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it is a sign that the path is different. And once that is accepted, it becomes something he carries, not something that stops him. Loneliness isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like isolation or absence. Sometimes it exists inside strength, inside control, inside the decision to live differently. The Sigma male doesn't avoid people. He filters them. He doesn't lack connection. He protects it. And in that process, something quiet forms. Not weakness, but a space few people truly understand. Most people spend their lives trying to escape loneliness. But here's the truth. They also avoid the depth that removes it. They stay in noise, in surface-level interaction, in constant distraction. The Sigma male chooses differently, and that choice comes with a cost. But it also comes with clarity, independence, and control most people never reach. If you want more insights into Sigma psychology, emotional depth, and the hidden realities behind silent independence, make sure you subscribe to Silent Wise. And tell me in the comments, do you think loneliness is something to escape or something that shapes you into who you become?